My husband died keeping a secret on his deathbed. He begged me, "Don't go to the ranch, Elena. Promise." I promised. I obeyed for 15 years, even when curiosity gnawed at me. But one day, I broke the promise, and when I opened that door, I discovered the truth he took to the grave, such a painful truth that it forever destroyed the image I had of the man I married. I still remember the insistent beeping of the heart monitor, that stubborn beep that seemed to count, not the heartbeats, but the seconds I had left with him. The cold hospital light cast shadows on the bones of Jose's face, honed by months of struggle. He squeezed my fingers with a strength no longer suited to his frail body. "Promise," he whispered bluntly, as if knowing that promises bind destinies. I rested my forehead against his and smelled ether, metal, and goodbye. "I promise," I replied, not fully understanding what I was tying. It was there, between the beep and the sigh, that the first door closed. He turned his eyes to the window, as if the heavens held answers I didn't know. He said I shouldn't go to the ranch, under any circumstances, no matter what. He offered no excuses, didn't tell half of it, didn't open any paths. Just that request, dry, hard, planted like a stone in the middle of the road. I wanted to ask why, but the words stuck like polite gasps. I was afraid to disturb the little peace that remained in that room, and I kept quiet as I had so often kept quiet out of love. His hand trembled, and the veins stood out like roots beneath his skin. "Elena, look at me," he begged, and I obeyed, as I always had, the simple things that came from his heart. His eyes were sunken, but there was still an authority there that I'd recognized since my youth. "Don't go," he repeated more quietly, like a whispered prayer. I felt a pang in my chest, the kind you hide by fidgeting with the sheets. I didn't want to contradict him on the verge of death, and, out of cowardice or affection, I nodded. The room had a solitude typical of late afternoon, and a sadness that clung to the skin. A nurse knocked on the door, entered with a light step, measured things, wrote down others, and left, leaving a deeper silence. I stroked his thinning hair and told him silly stories about when we used to dance at the terrero. He smiled at the corner of his mind, rummaging through the corners of his memory, like someone groping through an old drawer. I wanted to say that I ached with longing for the ranch, but I swallowed it. It seemed better to preserve the last wish of the man who had been my guiding light. "You're stubborn," he managed to joke, with the courage of someone trying to lighten the load. I replied that, with him, I had learned to be brave when it mattered and gentle when it was necessary. The truth is, I felt torn, as if the promise had ripped away a piece of me that still breathed. The ranch was part of our history, of summers of clothes hanging on the line and the smell of firewood. And yet, in that moment, it became a forbidden topic, a word that burned in my mouth. I fell silent again, tying the knot inside. As he fell asleep, I watched the curve of his shoulder beneath the blanket. It seemed smaller, as if life had already emptied the spaces somewhat. I thought of how many times he'd protected me without explaining anything, simply moving me out of harm's way like moving a vase. Maybe that was it, again, protection. But protection from what? The question bit, lingered, and wouldn't go away. I clutched the crucifix I'd inherited from my mother and quietly asked for clarity. Only one certainty came. I had promised. The next day, his spirit seemed already distant, as if slowly withdrawing so as not to frighten anyone. They brought him a thin soup, which he refused with a small gesture. I sat adjusting my pillow, wiping my forehead, inventing ways to keep from falling. "Elena, you're strong," he said, with a sweetness that hurt more than any harshness. I wanted to answer, "I'm not." I wanted to confess my fear of a world without him, but I didn't have the courage. The last image I wanted to leave behind was that of the woman he believed I was. In the early hours of the morning, I woke up with my body craving coffee and my heart begging for an answer. I went to the little hallway window, looked out at the dim city, and thought of the ranch as one might think of a relative they haven't seen in years. There, firm, the promise kept me company. Strange how a word can become a wall. Sometimes being faithful hurts as much as betraying. I returned to the bedroom holding that phrase. Being faithful hurts. And I remained silent, once again, because his pain was greater than my doubt. At the final moment, there was no fuss. The beeper stretched out in a continuous stream. The hurried footsteps came. The protocols were followed. I remained with my hand still clasped in his, as if there were something unfinished. And there was. He left without telling me why, leaving behind a trail of an order I wasn't sure I understood, but I knew I would carry out. I cried a little, swallowed a lot, and gathered the ring that was already slipping on my thin finger. The ranch, like a lurking animal, breathed in the corner of my mind. When I got home, the bed seemed too wide and the kitchen too small. Life loses its meaning when you're missing your partner. I opened the sideboard drawer to put away the hospital documents and found a photo of us at the ranch gate from when there were still no secrets between us. I laughed silently, the kind of laugh we give to keep from crying. I turned the photo away like turning off a light. And I promised again, I won't go. I won't go for now. In the following days, the promise became habit, and the habit became a kind of twisted prayer. I mentally repeated, I'm not going, like someone chewing a mantra to stave off hunger. Friends would ask about the ranch, out of politeness or old curiosity, and I'd deflect. I'd say the place was abandoned, that I preferred the city, that the bus was tiring me now. And each excuse I made was also a discreet crack in a dam. Because water, sooner or later, finds its way. And I, sooner than I'd like, would start hearing the noise. At night, I relived that room and that phrase, don't go, as if they were scenes on an old projector. I thought about the things men carry in silence, the burdens they choose to spare from the women they love. It was comfort and anger. It was protection and control. I swung like a pendulum between understanding and questioning. And as the hands marked a new life without him, the promise, like a clock of its own, tick-tock, tick-tock, continued inside me. How long? How far? He never let me near that ranch. I'd just mention a visit, and Jose would change the subject with a swiftness only known to those who hide something. Sometimes he'd laugh, saying there was nothing there but weeds, dust, and memories of youth. But there was a hardness hidden behind the laugh, a shadow that crossed his gaze. I understood, but I pretended to believe. Maybe out of convenience, maybe out of fear of asking. Because certain questions, we know we're not ready to hear the answer. It was strange. While all the neighbors boasted about their land, showing off crops, animals, and harvest stories, he remained silent. The ranch wasn't a source of pride, but of silence. As if it were a distant relative who wasn't mentioned at family gatherings. This intrigued me, even hurt me, because I, too, had dreams for that place. I wanted to plant flowers, I wanted to open windows and let the sun shine in. But any attempt to bring the ranch into our conversations died in the air. He always found a way to shut it down. I remember one time, still in the early years of our marriage, when I suggested we spend our anniversary there. He was chopping wood in the backyard and suddenly dropped the axe, looking at me as if startled. Not there, he simply said. No explanation, no justification. The silence that followed weighed more heavily than any words. I stood there, feeling my heart tighten, as if I'd accidentally touched a wound. Since that day, I've learned to avoid the subject. But inside me, a flea never stopped biting. It's curious how places can take on a life of their own, even when they're absent. The ranch began to grow inside my head like a ghost. The more he forbade it, the more I idealized it. Sometimes I dreamed of the house, dreamed of open doors, dreamed of voices echoing inside. I'd wake up startled, unsure if it was a warning or just my imagination. He never wanted to hear these dreams. If I spoke, he'd deflect. If I insisted, he'd get angry. As if the ranch were a dangerous abyss that shouldn't be gazed upon. As the years passed, the prohibition ceased to be just an order and became a wall between us. We had so many conversations about children, bills, and travel, but around the ranch, a void loomed. He talked about everything but that. And I pretended to accept it because love also makes us silent. But deep down, the woman I was wanted answers. I wanted to know why that land, which was rightfully ours, was being denied to me as if it were forbidden territory. With each silence from him, my curiosity grew. I don't know if it was intuition or just feminine suspicion, but I sensed that secret had deeper roots than I imagined. Sometimes I'd catch Jose staring into space, his gaze lost in some point in the past. It was always after we talked about family or memories. I knew he was at the ranch, deep in thought, and I, on the outside, could only guess. This mystery slowly ate away at me, like rust that silently advances until the wood gives way. But I maintained my composure, because love, back then, also meant enduring the other's enigmas. I even considered it was embarrassment. Maybe the ranch was in ruins, falling apart, and he didn't want to show it to me so as not to tarnish his image as a man who always took care of everything. This hypothesis comforted me. I thought, it must be just that, a matter of male pride. But something told me otherwise. Because the way he reacted wasn't that of someone hiding weakness, but rather of someone afraid that the truth will destroy everything. Truth about what? This question became an unwanted companion over the years. There was a day when I tried to joke, asking if the ranch was haunted. I laughed, he didn't. He just gave me a look, so serious my laughter died on my lips. That look carried weight, as if to say, "Don't joke about that, Elena." And I felt a shiver run down my spine, even in the morning sun. I realized he wasn't joking. That made me even more suspicious. Who gets so bothered by a joke? Only those who carry something that can't be revealed. The arguments about this were few and far between, but they left a lasting impression. One time, at the dinner table, I dared to ask again. He slammed down his fork and said, "Didn't I tell you? This isn't the place for you." The word "you" came out thick, as if it weren't just a wife who shouldn't go, but a specific danger to me. It hurt. Why was I, the woman in his life, excluded from that part of our history? I cried in secret that night. I cried not only because of the prohibition, but because of the distance it created between us. Over time, I learned to swallow my anguish. Daily obligations took up space, and I left the ranch tucked away in a drawer in my soul. But not erased. Never erased. It was there, pulsing like an unanswered question, throbbing like a toothache we try to ignore. I smiled in photos, took care of the house, visited relatives, but deep down, I knew there was a part of my husband I would never reach. And that wall had a name. The ranch. And deep down, I sensed that the ranch wasn't just a place. It was a key. A door to a part of Jose's life he'd never let me see. Every time he said, "Don't go," I felt as if he were protecting me from something bigger than I could imagine. And this feeling, though silent, grew. Until the day the promise became more than I could bear. After Jose left, the house felt too big for me. Every corner carried an echo of what we had been, and the silence spread like a stubborn shadow. I walked the hallways, and no matter how many times I opened the windows and let the sun in, it seemed his absence filled every space. The days were long, and the nights, the nights were even crueler. The clock ticked slowly, and I found myself staring at the empty chair, waiting for a conversation that would never come. At first, I tried to distract myself. Time seemed to be demanding that I get my life together, that I fill the gaps with new routines. I took embroidery classes, attended church gatherings, helped neighbors with small favors. But when night fell, nothing worked. The silence of widowhood carries a weight that the noise of the world cannot compensate for. It's as if the soul has lost its partner in the dance, and the entire rhythm is out of rhythm. It was in this emptiness that the promise began to hammer even more deeply. I remembered his words in the hospital as if it were yesterday. Don't go. It was a voice that echoed inside my mind, haunting me even in my dreams. Sometimes I woke scared, convinced he was at the foot of the bed, repeating his warning. Other times, I dreamed the ranch appeared before me, its door ajar, inviting and threatening at the same time. I woke sweating, my heart racing, and wondered, what could be so serious that it would cross over to the underworld? Grief is treacherous. It makes us believe that time will heal, but in reality it only mends the wounds. I moved on with my life, yes, but always with the feeling that something was hanging in the air. My friends told me I needed to move on, but how could I move on when part of the story remains locked away? It was like reading halfway through a book and being forced to put it down forever. And I, who have always been curious, didn't take kindly to that kind of unfinished ending. The years passed and the children grew up. Each went their own way, as is natural. I smiled at family gatherings, playing my role as mother and grandmother, but there was a part of me that lived in anticipation. The ranch wouldn't leave my mind. Even though I never mentioned it, I knew that land remained there, frozen in time, like a secret forcibly buried. And the more I pretended not to care, the more it infiltrated my thoughts. It was as if Jose had left me not only with his absence, but also with his restlessness. Sometimes, in moments of solitude, I would open old boxes of memories. Yellowed photographs, letters from other times, objects that held stories. In some photos, there was the ranch in the background, half hidden, almost like an extra in a life he never let me revisit. I would run my finger over the image, trying to wring some answer from it. But photos only show what is already past. What was hidden was still hidden, mocking my obedient silence. The most painful thing was that, in life, Jose never treated me with distrust. On the contrary, we always shared small secrets, intimate secrets as a couple. And precisely for that reason, the prohibition hurt me so much. Why, after all, had he excluded me from this part of his story? This contrast was a wound that wouldn't heal. Sometimes I wondered, did he not trust me? Other times, did he just want to protect me? These questions spun like a millstone inside my mind, never resting. Solitude makes us replay every detail of the past. And it was in this silent exercise that I began to recall interrupted conversations, phrases left hanging, averted glances when the ranch was mentioned. These small memories, which had previously seemed harmless, now took on a new weight, as if they were clues to a riddle I hadn't known how to interpret at the time. The silence of the years hadn't erased these memories. On the contrary, it highlighted each one of them, as if they were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't yet figured out how to put together. Some days I rebelled. I slammed doors, talked to myself, cursed that ranch that never wanted me. It was a way of purging the pain, even if no one saw. Other days I retreated into prayer, asking God to give me patience and clarity, because I had this mixture of feelings, love for the man who was gone and anger for the secret he left behind. It was a strange weight, one I carried in silence. And the silence sometimes screams louder than any words. Years went by like this, trying to rebuild a life, but always with that thorn in my side. Each birthday of his was a new wound, because along with the memories came the shadow of the ranch. I smiled at the world, but inside I harbored a doubt that wouldn't leave me alone. And the more years passed, the more I felt that time wasn't erasing anything. On the contrary, it was sharpening my curiosity, like a knife sharpened by friction. And I knew that one day, sooner or later, this promise would be put to the test. The nights were the worst. I'd lie down trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that the ranch was nothing more than an unimportant detail. But I only had to close my eyes for my mind to betray me. Strange dreams would come, some without rhyme or reason, others so real that I'd wake with my heart racing. There was always the ranch, always a closed door. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, feeling as if Jose's silence had reached beyond death to haunt me. How could I rest like that? Curiosity became a daily burden. I washed the dishes, but my mind was on the ranch. I walked to the market, greeted neighbors, and deep down I wondered, what's on that land? Sometimes I'd stop in the middle of a task, feeling the sense of being deceived. And it gnawed at me. It wasn't just about the ranch itself, but about what it represented. I had shared my life with Jose, but didn't I have the right to share the truth? That hurt more than any memory of widowhood. It was like an itching wound inside. The more I tried to ignore it, the more the urge grew. I spent nights sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the crucifix on the wall, as if it would give me some answer. I asked God for clarity, but only a heavy silence came. And I knew silence is also an answer, only crueler. Because silence feeds doubt, and doubt is a hunger that is never satisfied. I felt this hunger growing inside me, and I could no longer pretend as much as before. There were days when I left home determined to catch the bus and hit the road. My suitcase packed, my keys in my purse, my heart racing. But something always held me back. Sometimes it was a memory of Jose looking at me seriously. Other times, it was the fear of what I might find. Returning with answers seemed scarier than remaining in doubt. It was as if I were at a crossroads. On one side, the promise. On the other, the truth. And I still didn't know which path hurt more. Curiosity began to creep into small things. A smell of damp wood reminded me of the ranch. A bird's song, the drier country wind, even the taste of coffee brewed in a cloth strainer. Everything became a trigger, and I unintentionally found myself collecting invisible memories. It was as if the ranch had taken root even inside my home. I breathed it in, and somehow I also breathed in that prohibition that never made sense. The mystery already lived within me. Even the children understood. One day my daughter asked, "Mom, why do you talk so much about this ranch if you never go there?" I swallowed hard. What could I say? I smiled, covered it up, said it was just missing the countryside, the smell of earth. But inside I felt ashamed. Ashamed of not being able to explain, even to myself, what had me so captivated. And in that moment, I realized that the secret was already corroding not only my mind, but also my relationship with those still around me. I even wondered if I was becoming obsessed. Friends would come over for coffee, and I'd change the subject so as not to seem crazy. But the truth is, I was obsessed. The ranch had become an open wound that I couldn't let heal. And worst of all, no one else seemed to care. To everyone else, it was just a piece of land. To me, it was the key to something that could redefine my entire life with Jose. And I no longer knew if I wanted to carry that weight alone. There were nights when I sat on the porch, gazing at the starry sky, remembering how Jose and I would spend hours talking about life and dreams. And it pained me to think that he, the man who shared everything with me, didn't want to share the truth about that place. The sky seemed more distant, and the stars colder. I asked aloud, "Why, Jose? Why?" The wind blew in response, but it brought only a shiver. It wasn't an answer, it was a provocation. And the provocation burned more than the doubt. My curiosity began to take the form of courage. Little by little, the promise faded within me, and the desire to know grew stronger. I knew that sooner or later I would give in. It was inevitable. The promise that had seemed sacred no longer sustained me. Instead, it plunged me into torment. And every time I closed my eyes, the image of the ranch door came to mind. I knew, one day, that door would open, whether I wanted it to or not. And it was at that point that I began to sense something was about to happen. The silence was no longer enough to hold me back, and curiosity now completely overcame me. I no longer wondered if I would find out. I wondered when. Because there was a growing certainty within me. The ranch wasn't calling me for nothing. It held something, and sooner or later, I would be forced to face it. Over time, I began to replay conversations that previously seemed unimportant. Loose phrases, spoken between coffees, took on new meaning after Jose left. Like the time he commented, out of the blue, that certain truths were best forgotten. At the time, I thought it was just the musings of a tired man, but today those words sound like clues left on purpose. Clues I'd ignored, but which now poked me like shards of glass on my skin. I remember one afternoon we were on the porch, watching the sunset. Jose was talking about the simple life, about how the past should be buried, so the present could flourish. There are things that aren't worth stirring up, he said, staring straight ahead. I asked him what he was talking about, and he just smiled sideways, as if changing the subject without seeming rude. At the time, I didn't press the issue, but after his death, that phrase began to echo uncomfortably. What things weren't worth having? There was also a night when we received an unexpected visitor. A strange, curt-spoken man brought some papers for Jose to sign. After he left, I asked who he was. Ranch business, he replied quickly, almost crossly. I tried to pull the thread, but he wouldn't let me. He said it wasn't to worry, that it didn't concern me. And then he moved on to another topic, as if nothing had happened. But in my memory, it lingered. Who was that man? What papers were those? Even in moments of joy, the ranch loomed like a shadow. I remember one Christmas, when one of the sons wondered if it wouldn't be better to spend the holidays in the countryside. Jose choked on his wine, coughed, and replied sharply, "Never again in that place." The family laughed, thinking it was an old man's tantrum, but I saw the nervousness in his eyes. It was brief, but I saw it. He changed the subject immediately, asking for more dessert. And everyone forgot, except me. I never forgot. These interrupted conversations began to form a kind of mosaic in my mind. Each piece alone didn't say much, but together, they began to form something. A line of silence, of prohibitions, of cut-off topics. It was as if Jose had built a wall of unfinished words. And I, now alone, tried to decipher what was hidden behind that wall. It was distressing because the more I remembered, the more I realized the answers had always been there between the lines. What haunted me most was his serenity as he cut me off. It wasn't just fear or anger. It was conviction, as if he was certain that sparing me was more important than sharing the truth. This made me angry because I felt excluded from an essential part of his life. But it also confused me because if he believed he was protecting me, did I have the right to want to know? These questions pounded in my mind night after night, never finding rest. I also remembered an old argument, the kind you have when you're still young and your blood runs hot. I'd accused him of hiding things, and he, nervous, simply said, "You wouldn't understand." Those 3 words came back to me like ghosts. Why wouldn't I understand? Wasn't I his wife? Wasn't I his life partner? If he thought I couldn't understand, it was because the truth was too big or too dark. And that possibility disturbed me more and more. Some practical details also began to catch my attention. Jose had always been organized with his documents, but there was an envelope he kept separate, locked in a drawer he never gave me the key to. I foolishly respected that. Today, I realized that perhaps there lay the answer I'd always sought. That envelope, forgotten in my memory, became a symbol of the ranch. Closed, inaccessible, heavy with mystery. And now I wondered if it was still somewhere in the house, waiting for me. Every memory, every cut-off conversation, every averted glance, now came back with a vengeance. It was as if Jose had said more in what he kept silent than in what he said. And I, out of love, didn't listen to the silences. Today, those silences echoed too loudly. They became screams that pushed me, that told me not to accept ignorance as a legacy. Because missing a husband is one thing, quite another, the weight of a secret that lives on even after death. And it was like that, revisiting interrupted conversations, that I realized my curiosity wasn't just stubbornness. It was almost a calling. as if the ranch itself were summoning me, using Jose's memory as a messenger. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't escape forever. The broken sentences, the guarded silences, all pointed in the same direction. I needed to put the pieces together. I needed to break through the wall he'd built. Even if, on the other side, I found something that would change everything. The ranch, just thinking about it filled my mind with dusty images, like photographs forgotten in the back of a drawer. It had been so many years since I'd set foot there that sometimes I wondered if it still truly existed, or if it was just a figment of my memory. I remembered the smell of aged wood, the creaking of tiles in the strong wind, and the packed dirt floor that soiled the hems of my dress. It all seemed so distant, as if it belonged to another life, to a younger, more hopeful Elena. The ranch has always been a piece of our history, but also a piece torn from me. I would pass the roads that led to it and look away, obeying Jose's request. It was as if there were an invisible line on the map of my life, a border I couldn't cross. And the more time passed, the more that absence became present. Because there is nothing more vivid than what we try to forcefully forget. The ranch was a ghost that silently accompanied me. In my memory, his image was always shrouded in dust and shadow. I remembered the wooden gate, already crooked, that creaked with the slightest push. I remembered the simple porch where we sat for coffee before Jose decided to banish that place from our lives. With each memory, my heart filled with a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. Nostalgia for what we'd experienced, sorrow for never understanding why he'd driven me away from that landscape that was also mine. I wondered, what had changed so much? Sometimes, when I was alone, I would close my eyes and try to imagine what the ranch would look like now. Maybe the walls had cracked. Maybe the weeds had taken over. Maybe there was nothing left but rubble. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just an abandoned place, I always had the feeling the ranch remained intact. As if time had stopped inside it, freezing the mystery along with the walls. It was an uncomfortable sensation that made me shiver. There were days when I could almost hear the ranch calling me. The wind blew hard, and I thought I could hear that gate creaking. I closed my eyes and saw the dust rising as I opened the door. I even smelled the mildew and remembered the sound of the floorboards giving way underfoot. It wasn't just a memory, it was like a living, insistent presence. And even as I resisted, I felt the ranch growing closer, even though it was so far away. It was as if it were breathing inside me. The forgotten ranch was also a memory of my youth. I remember the first few times Jose took me there, with that pride in his eyes, telling me it would be our refuge. We'd spend entire afternoons on the porch, laughing at silly things, dreaming of a future that seemed so simple. How had this place, once so much ours, become taboo? That question gnawed at me, because the sweet memory was tainted by the bitter prohibition. It was as if someone had written two different stories about the same setting. I also thought about what the neighbors were saying. After we stopped visiting, rumors began to spread that the ranch was abandoned to moths. Some said they saw strange lights there at night. Others swore they heard human noises. I laughed it off to dismiss it, but deep down, these stories resonated with me. Because, deep down, I knew that every abandonment holds secrets. And perhaps the ranch had never truly been empty. Maybe that was why Jose wanted to keep me away. Every time I remembered the ranch, it was like opening a wound. I wanted to erase it, but I couldn't. It was like a song that wouldn't leave my head, repeated endlessly. Sometimes I dreamed of the dirt road, long and silent, leading straight to the gate. I woke with the feeling of having actually been there, of having felt the cold key in my hand. These sensations left me torn. Part of me wanted to run away, but another part felt that I would only find peace if I set foot on that ground again. The strangest thing was how clearly I remembered small details. The sound of rain hitting the roof, the smell of wet earth, the warmth of the wood stove. These were memories so vivid they couldn't be just old memories. It was as if the ranch had been engraved on me, every detail tattooed on my soul. And this clarity, instead of calming me, only increased my uneasiness. Because I knew no one holds so tightly to something that doesn't matter. The ranch wasn't just a place. It was an answer. And as the years passed, the forgotten ranch ceased to be just a memory and became a calling. It was like a door throbbing, demanding to be opened. Jose might have taken the secret to his grave, but the ranch remained, still and silent, waiting for me. And I was no longer sure how much longer I could resist that call. There was a night when I sat alone at the kitchen table, my coffee growing cold before me, and I realized I could no longer carry that weight. The promise I made to Jose on his deathbed, which had once felt like a sacred oath, now felt like a prison. I had always kept my word, but there was something stronger calling me, a restlessness that wouldn't be silenced. It was as if the ranch was screaming inside my chest. And I knew, sooner or later, I would give in. I spent days trying to convince myself to forget. I told myself it was just foolish curiosity, that it wasn't worth breaking my husband's last wish. But the more I repeated it, the stronger the urge grew. It was like holding water in my hands. No matter how tightly I squeezed, it always slipped through my fingers. I could no longer sleep peacefully, could no longer live peacefully. The promise had turned into torment, and I began to doubt whether Jose had truly wanted to protect me or hide something from me. The trigger came one rainy afternoon. I was tidying my room and, upon opening an old drawer, I found a yellowed photo of the ranch. It was the two of us, smiling, sitting on the porch. He had his arm around me, and I had eyes full of hope. I held that photo for long minutes, tears falling onto the paper. And then I realized that place wasn't just his, it was ours. I had a right to that story, too. And if there was a secret there, I had a right to know it. In the following days, I began to dream even more about the ranch. Vivid, almost real dreams. I would open the door and smell damp wood, hear voices whispering. I would wake up startled, my heart racing. It felt like an inevitable call, as if something or someone were pushing me there. I tried to resist, but I realized I was fighting a force greater than myself. It was at that moment that I understood. This wasn't just about breaking a promise. It was about freeing my soul from a prison. I spent days pacing the house in silence, wondering what to do. I'd sit in the living room chair and stare at the front door, as if waiting for Jose to appear and reprimand me. But he didn't. The silence only confirmed that the decision was now mine. I felt guilty, it's true, as if I were betraying his memory. But at the same time, I felt that if I didn't go to the ranch, I'd never have peace. And this guilt was mixed with anger. Anger at having been left with half a story. I began preparing everything in secret. I grabbed a small bag, packed simple clothes, some documents, and a photo of the ranch. I didn't want anyone to know. I didn't want explanations or advice. I knew that if anyone tried to stop me, I would give up. It was an intimate, personal, almost sacred decision. As I folded my clothes, my hands trembled. But it wasn't fear. It was a strange mix of anxiety and relief, like someone finally deciding to cross a bridge after years of standing on its edge. That night, I sat in front of the mirror and stared at myself for long minutes. I saw the wrinkles left by time, I saw the tired eyes, but I also saw something different. Determination. It was as if the obedient woman I had always been had been left behind, and another, braver one was emerging. I spoke aloud. Jose, forgive me, but I'm going. The words echoed through the empty room, and for a moment I felt as if he were there listening. But there was no answer, only silence. And that silence gave me the permission I needed. The next day, I woke before sunrise. The air was still chilly, and the city was asleep. I closed the door slowly, as if fleeing, and felt a pang in my chest. But I didn't look back. I walked to the bus station with firm steps, each one heavier than the last, but all inevitable. When I bought the ticket to the countryside, my hands were sweating. It was like signing a pact. The ticket lady smiled, unaware of the weight of that ticket. For her, it was just another trip. For me, it was the breaking of a destiny. As the bus rumbled down the road, I looked out the window and saw the countryside stretching away, vast and silent. Every tree I passed seemed to watch me. Every curve seemed to bring me closer to something I could no longer avoid. My heart pounded, a mix of fear and hope. I wondered, what would I find? Ruins? Secrets? Or just confirmation that I'd broken a vain promise? These questions throbbed, but there was no turning back. The decision had been made. It was at that moment that I understood. It was no longer a matter of wanting it or not. It was destiny. I needed to open that door. I needed to face what was hidden, because the worst prison is the one we ourselves accept carrying. And I no longer accepted living locked in doubt. I knew that before going to the ranch, I needed to find the key. There was no point in arriving there and standing before a closed door, trapped in the fate I had chosen. So I began to search the house in silence, like someone hunting for memories. I opened drawers, rummaged through forgotten shoeboxes, and rummaged through old cabinets. With each object I found, a piece of our lives surfaced. Letters, photographs, receipts. But the key seemed to be playing hide and seek with me, as if it had a will of its own. It was late one afternoon that fate decided to cooperate. I was cleaning the old sideboard in the living room, the one I almost never used, when I felt a false bottom in the drawer. My heart raced. My hands trembled, but I persisted, pressing the wood with my fingertips. There it was, a small cloth bundle, yellowed with age. I slowly untied the knot, and when the fabric parted, I saw the dull gleam of a rusty key. My breath hitched, and I leaned against the wall. It was her. There was no doubt. I gripped the key tightly, and a shiver ran through me. It was as if Jose were still there, watching me. That cold object carried the weight of years of silence, prohibition, and mystery. I closed my eyes for a moment, and felt as if I had definitely betrayed my promise. But at the same time, there was a sense of liberation. The key was in my hands, and that changed everything. I was no longer a hostage to the secret. I had the power to unlock it. I held the key up to the window light and examined every detail. The metal was worn, with marks that betrayed decades of use. I imagined how many times Jose had held it, how many times he had locked and unlocked that door without me being there. I felt angry at being excluded from what was also part of my life. But along with the anger came a disturbing question. What was he locking away so carefully? What truth required such care, leaving me out? That night, I couldn't sleep. I left the key on my bedside table, and every time I turned my head, its glow called to me. It was as if it were teasing me. Do you dare? I turned away, closed my eyes, but the image returned. I even reached out to put it back in the drawer, but I gave up. I wanted to see it. I wanted to feel its presence. Because, deep down, I knew that key was no longer just an object. It was a calling. I thought about throwing it away. I thought about putting it away again, pretending I'd never found it. But it was too late. That small piece of iron had the power to change my life. Throwing it away would be like denying my destiny. Keeping it would be like accepting prison again. So I sat there, staring at the key as if staring at a cross. A symbol, a proof, a burden. And I decided, I won't run away. If it ended up in my hands, it's because the time has come. I spent the next few days with the key in my pocket like a lucky charm. Sometimes, without realizing it, I'd hold it inside my purse, clutching it tightly, as if seeking courage in the cold metal. Other times, I'd take it out, place it in the palm of my hand, and examine the details, imagining what it would unlock. It was a strange sensation. Fear and anxiety walking hand in hand. But above all, I was certain that this secret couldn't remain buried forever. My children noticed something had changed in me. Mom, you're different. What are you thinking about? I smiled and told them they were just memories from the past. They didn't need to know. That key was mine alone. And for the first time in many years, I felt I was living something that belonged entirely to me. I was no longer the obedient widow, the resigned woman. I was someone who, even late, dared to face the shadows that had always haunted her. One night, I dreamed I was walking to the ranch. The key was heavy in my hand, hot as a coal. In the dream, I opened the door and a bright light blinded me. I woke up startled, my heart racing. But instead of fear, I felt a strange peace, as if that dream had given me confirmation. I had to go. There was no more delay. The key didn't just want to be found. It wanted to fulfill its purpose. And so, with the hidden key finally revealed, I realized there was no turning back. The ranch awaited me, and within it, the truth. The day arrived without a moment's notice. I woke before sunrise, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the key on the nightstand. It seemed to glow on its own, as if it knew the fate that awaited me. My body trembled, whether from fear or anxiety. I grabbed the small bag I'd packed for days. Simple clothes, a coat, a photo of the ranch, and, of course, the key. When I closed the front door behind me, I felt it wasn't just wood closing. It was as if a part of my life had been left behind. The road to the bus station seemed longer than ever. Each step echoed within me like a reminder. I was breaking my promise. Jose's words came to mind, repeated, almost like a whispered rebuke. Don't go. But along with them came an opposing sensation, as if an invisible force were pushing me forward. And I, torn between guilt and destiny, kept going. The silence of the streets that early morning only heightened the intensity of what I felt. As the bus pulled away, I leaned my forehead against the window and let my gaze drift over the fields. The landscape changed slowly, and with it, so did my heart. Every tree I passed seemed to bear witness to my decision. The gentle rocking of the vehicle lulled my thoughts, and at times I nearly cried. I thought about turning back, I thought about giving up. But then I clutched the key in my pocket and remembered, there's no going back for those who have already decided to face the truth. I was alone, but I could no longer back down. The trip was long, and each kilometer traveled was like opening a drawer of memories. I remembered the times Jose would drive that same route, his easy smile, the conversations about the future. And it pained me to think that, while I dreamed of flowers and life on the ranch, he was already hiding secrets. This contrast gnawed at me. The bus moved forward, but I felt like I was going back in time, peeling back layers of a life I'd never fully known. It was a wound reopening with every bend in the road. There were times when I closed my eyes and asked myself, what if I can't handle what I'll find? That question tore at me inside, because the truth can be heavier than a lie. What if Jose's secret was something that would destroy my memory of him? I took deep breaths, trying to calm my heart, but doubt persisted in tormenting me. Even so, there was no stopping. Destiny was already set, and I simply followed its silent path. The driver didn't say much, but at one point he commented, "It's been a while since I've taken anyone to those parts." I swallowed hard and just shook my head. He didn't know he was carrying much more than a passenger. He was carrying a 15-year silence, a secret that wouldn't let me sleep. And every word he said seemed to confirm how much that place had been forgotten by the world, but not by me. The ranch might be off the map for many, but inside me, it was always alive. When I got off the bus, the country air immediately enveloped me. It was cooler, more humid, and carried with it the smell of wet earth. I took a deep breath, feeling both relief and a heavier weight. The dirt road before me seemed endless, lined with trees that formed a kind of natural tunnel. I clutched my bag tightly and began walking, each step stirring up dust and memories.
I was alone, yes.
But every tree shadow seemed to carry Jose's eyes watching me. As I walked, I realized how deafening solitude can be. There were no voices, no laughter, no distractions. Just the sound of my footsteps and the wind rustling through the leaves. This solitude, however, didn't frighten me. It was as if I could finally hear my own soul without interference. And it told me, keep going. What you seek is near. The ranch was no longer just a distant place. It was there, pulsing on the horizon of my mind. At every bend in the road, my heart raced, hoping to see the outline of the house in the distance. But it hid itself, as if delighting in teasing. I walked faster, then slower, as if playing a game with fate. Sweat dripped down my face, but I didn't care. The key in my pocket seemed to weigh more and more, as if pulling me toward the waiting door. And I knew, soon, that forgotten gate would appear before me. And when I finally saw the silhouette of the ranch in the distance, time seemed to stand still. There it stood, still, silent, as if it had been waiting for me all these years. My eyes filled with tears, and my legs weakened. I was facing the end of the promise, and the beginning of the truth. The solitary journey ended there, but within me another journey began, that of opening the door and facing what Jose had hidden for so long. I arrived at the ranch gate on shaky legs. The old wooden gate was crooked, covered in moss and rust, as if bearing the weight of years of neglect. I reached out and touched it slowly. The rough would scratch my fingers, and a shiver ran through me. I pushed carefully, and the sound I heard still echoes in my mind. A long, sharp creak, like a lament trapped in time. It was as if the ranch had awakened with my arrival. I walked through the gate and up to the house's front door. Each step stirred up dust, and the smell of earth mixed with dry leaves enveloped me. The porch was overgrown with weeds, and some tiles had fallen off, leaving gaps through which the sunlight timidly filtered through. When I stopped in front of the door, my heart raced like never before.
It was there.
That door separated my life into two, before and after. I took the key from my pocket, and it seemed to pulse coldly in my hand. Its weight was almost unbearable. I brought the key to the lock and realized my hands were shaking. The rusty metal resisted, as if it wouldn't turn. I forced it slowly, listening to the rust hiss as it dissolved. The sound was suffocating, like a groan that had pierced the years. I closed my eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and turned harder. The lock gave way with a sharp snap. The silence of the room was shattered, and suddenly, it seemed the entire air around me grew denser. I knew I was about to cross a threshold. I pushed the door open, and it responded with another long, deeper creak, as if protesting my boldness. The sound echoed through the empty hallways, and I felt as if I were being watched. It was as if the walls and old furniture held invisible eyes. Dust rose in clouds, seeping into my lungs, and I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. I hesitated on the threshold, briefly considering retreating. But there was no turning back. A promise can hold you captive, but curiosity liberates and exacts a heavy price. When I finally crossed the threshold, the cold enveloped me like an unexpected embrace. Inside, the air was heavy, almost still, as if the years had stood still. Every piece of furniture covered in white sheets seemed like a shadow, a silent presence. The floor creaked with each step, betraying my intrusion. I placed my hand on my chest, holding my heart, which felt like it was about to leap. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead, even in the freezing cold. I was inside the ranch, and it was as if it were inside me. I closed the door behind me, and the noise echoed like thunder. I stood still for a few seconds, looking around, trying to adjust to the gloom. The threadbare curtains let in only slivers of light, creating ghostly patterns on the walls. Dust danced in the air, illuminated by the beams that filtered through the cracks. This wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a living testament, And I felt that, at any moment, something would reveal itself to me. Every detail caught my attention. The stopped wall clock, the crooked pictures, the table still set with cracked china plates. It was as if someone had left in a hurry and never returned. I touched the objects carefully, as if touching relics. But there was something unsettling about everything. The feeling that this place didn't want to be violated. And yet, I was there, defying the silence. The ranch seemed to breathe with me in an irregular rhythm, full of secrets. As I walked slowly, I heard the door creak behind me again. I turned back, startled, but it was closed, unmoving. I swore I'd heard the sound. My heart raced and I felt my palms sweat. It was then that I realized it wasn't just the past that haunted me, but also the fear of the unknown. Every noise seemed like a warning, every shadow an omen. And I wondered, had Jose been trying to protect me not from a secret, but from something much greater? Doubt throbbed along with fear. I took a few more steps and felt the entire ranch watching me. It was as if the walls were whispering stories I couldn't yet understand. I put the key back in my pocket, as if it could protect me. But the truth was, the key had already done its job. It opened the door. The rest was now up to me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and continued walking deeper and deeper into the house. Because I knew the answer was there, hidden somewhere. And in that moment, faced with the heavy silence and the creaking of the boards, I felt that the ranch wasn't just a place of memories. It was a guardian. And the secrets Jose had tried to hide were ready to come to light. As soon as I took my first steps into the ranch, the smell hit me hard. It was a dense odor, a mixture of damp wood, mold, and rust. Each breath seemed to pull years of silence into my lungs. I closed my eyes for a moment, and it felt like I was breathing in the past itself, as if each speck of dust were a forgotten memory. This smell wasn't just unpleasant. It was almost symbolic, as if reminding me that nothing there had ever truly been buried. I ran my hand over one of the sheets covering the furniture, and as I pulled it back, a cloud of dust rose into the air. Coughing, I pulled away, but continued to watch. Beneath the fabric, an old armchair, still firm, waited as if awaiting my return. The fabric was worn, but its shape brought back memories of when Jose and I would sit down to rest after a day's work. The smell of dust mixed with the memory of his sweat made me shiver. It was as if the ranch silently held every trace of our lives. The air inside had a strange thickness. It wasn't just the accumulated dust. It was as if time itself had condensed in that space. Each step I took made the boards creak, releasing a more intense smell, as if the floor were exuding its own history. I inhaled and tasted the metallic taste of rust, like forgotten blood. It was suffocating, but at the same time impossible to avoid. I wanted to cover my nose, but I knew I needed to feel it. The ranch spoke to me through its smell. As I walked, I noticed that each room had its own aroma. The living room carried the heavy odor of wood and iron. The kitchen, though covered in dust, had remnants of stale coffee, as if someone had left a kettle there yesterday. In the hallway, a sweeter scent, perhaps of dried flowers forgotten in vases. And this contrast made me even more uneasy. It was as if different moments of life were frozen in each space, just waiting for someone to free them. And I, alone, breathed them all in. At one point, I stopped in front of a dust-covered bookshelf. I ran my fingers over the shelves and caught the strong scent of aged paper. It was an unmistakable odor, the same one I'd smelled in the school library as a child. But here, mixed with the mold, it seemed to carry a heavier weight. I pulled out a book at random, and as I opened it, a blast of dust made me cough. I closed it quickly, startled, but the smell lingered in my hands. It was as if that book had held secrets for too long. With each step, the feeling that Jose was still there intensified. The smell of the ranch wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It brought back memories of laughter, conversation, but also of arguments and silences. It was as if I could feel his presence simply by breathing. I wondered if that wasn't what he wanted to avoid, for me to feel the weight of the past again through every detail permeating the air. But it was too late. I was too deep to retreat. The most disturbing thing was when I approached the stairs leading to the upper floor. The smell there was different. Stronger, more enclosed, as if that space had held something even more intimate. I climbed 2 steps and felt a shiver run down my spine. The air seemed denser, almost unbreathable. I felt like I was about to suffocate. I descended again, panting, trying to catch my breath. The mess seemed to say, "Not yet." And I, heeding the warning, remained downstairs. I sat for a moment in a covered chair, trying to calm my breathing. The scent of old cloth entered my nose, reminding me of my mother's closets, where she kept clothes from other times. That sense of inheritance, of an unlived past, made me tremble. The ranch had the same effect. It brought to the surface things I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. And yet there I was, breathing in every detail, unable to escape. It was painful but also necessary, because sometimes, to move forward, we need to face what stinks inside. I got up slowly and continued exploring. With each open door, the same scene. White sheets, dust floating in the air, unmoving furniture. But the smell guided me. It was as if each aroma took me deeper into my memory. And I knew it was no coincidence. The ranch was telling me its story, not in words, but in sensations. And I, against my will, was listening. Or rather, breathing. Because there, even the air had a voice. It was then, as I reached the end of the hallway, that I smelled something different. An even stronger, more concentrated scent, coming from a closed door. I stopped in front of it, my heart racing. It was as if the entire ranch had led me there, guiding my sense of smell, testing my courage. I placed my hand on the doorknob and took a deep breath. The scent of the past was about to reveal something more. And I knew that once I opened that door, there would be no turning back. The door before me seemed different from the others. While the others were merely heavy with dust and age, this one seemed to resist of its own volition. The dark wood was marked with scratches, as if nails or objects had tried to force it open. I pressed my ear to it, and the silence on the other side was almost deafening. Still, there was something calling to me, as if this room were the heart of the ranch, the core of the secret Jose had kept from me for so long. I pulled on the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder, and the metallic sound of the lock responded, dry, cold, impenetrable. My heart raced, and for a moment I felt Jose there, holding on to the other side, repeating his old warning, "Don't go." But I couldn't back away any longer. That room called to me in an almost supernatural way. It was as if the entire ranch had led me there, only to place me before that door. And suddenly, everything seemed to make sense. I reached into my pocket and remembered the key. I pulled it out slowly, observing its dull gleam in the dim light filtering through the window cracks. My hands were shaking, and sweat dripped down my palms, making it difficult to grip the metal. I took a deep breath and placed the key in the lock. It fit almost perfectly, as if the key had waited all these years for just this moment. I turned it slowly, and the click echoed inside me like thunder. I was about to cross another frontier. But before pushing open the door, I hesitated. Fear suddenly gripped me, paralyzing my movements. What if what was hidden there destroyed everything I thought about Jose? What if the love of my life had lived a lie that would now fall upon me like a landslide? I closed my eyes, begging for strength. I felt tears burning in the corners of my eyes. But an inner voice said, "You've already come this far. You can't stop now." And with that borrowed courage, I pushed open the door. The sound of hinges echoed through the hallway, a high-pitched groan that seemed to announce the revelation. The room was darker than the others. The windows were closed, covered by heavy curtains, and the air was almost unbreathable. I entered slowly, smelling the strong scent of rotting wood mixed with something sweet and cloying. I felt as if I were trespassing into a forbidden temple, a space that wanted no witnesses. But there I was, crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. With slow steps, I advanced to the center of the room. I ran my hand along the wall, trying to find a speck of light, but everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. The atmosphere was stifling, and each breath seemed to bring back memories I hadn't even known I had. With each detail, the certainty grew. Jose was keeping something precious there, something that justified all the years of silence. The ranch wasn't just an abandoned house. It was a safe. And this room was its most intimate gateway. My eyes began to adjust to the darkness, and I began to make out shapes. A trunk in the corner, covered by a sheet. A desk with closed drawers. And on top of it, a pile of yellowed papers, so fragile they seemed like they would fall apart at the slightest touch. My heart pounded, as if I were about to unravel a conspiracy. With every second, my mind filled with questions. What was Jose so desperate to hide? What parallel life could be hidden within that locked space? I knelt before the chest, the object that most caught my attention. It was large, heavy, with rusted hardware and a broken padlock. As if someone had tried to open it before, but given up. I ran my hand over the lid, feeling the dust stick to my skin. The cold metal scent shivers down my spine. I took a deep breath, ready to open it. But I hesitated once more, because I knew that once I lifted that lid, there would be no turning back. Whatever was inside would change everything. I stood for a few moments, simply staring at the room, trying to absorb every detail. The peeling walls, the cracked ceiling, the dense smell that suffocated me. It was as if the space itself was testing me, asking if I was ready to see what it held. And deep down, I wasn't sure if I was. But the desire to know was stronger. I had to face it, because nothing hurts more than living in doubt. And that room, closed for so many years, held the key to freeing or condemning my memory. I placed my hands on the trunk lid, feeling my heart pound so hard it echoed off the walls. I held on tight, took a deep breath, and prepared to stand. The entire ranch seemed to hold its breath with me, waiting for my next move. The silence was absolute, heavy, almost sacred. And in that instant I knew I was about to discover the truth Jose had carried for 15 years. A truth that could destroy me or set me free. I approached the desk and, with trembling hands, touched the yellowed papers scattered across it. Dust rose in small clouds, and the strong smell of aged paper filled the room. It was a dense odor, a mixture of mold and history. I felt a pang in my chest. These documents were not just cold records, they were pieces of a life Jose had hidden from me. I picked up the first page carefully, fearing it would crumble between my fingers. The letters, already faded, were still legible, and what I saw took my breath away. They were purchase and sale records, signatures I'd never seen before, names I didn't recognize. Old contracts, some even dated before our marriage. How was that possible? Jose always told me the ranch was worthless, that it was just a forgotten piece of land. But the papers told a different story. Deals, transactions, people coming and going from that property. I felt a chill. Could he have had a parallel life, a web of commitments he never told me about? I continued leafing through the papers, and among the papers, I found letters. Handwritten, in a handwriting that wasn't his. Words of affection, phrases that seemed too intimate to be from mere acquaintances. My heart sank. I couldn't tell if they were business letters laced with affection, or if they revealed something even deeper. I held one of them tighter, feeling the fragile paper almost tear. Jose, I hope one day you have the courage to open the door for me. I read this sentence quietly, and my legs nearly gave out. There were also official documents, with seals and notary signatures. Among them, I found a deed in someone else's name, but linked to the ranch. It was as if Jose had made hidden deals, perhaps even transferred property.
But why?
To protect someone? To hide it from me? The weight of those pages seemed greater than the trunk itself. Each document revealed not just information, but an entire world I never imagined existed. And there I was, trying to piece it together. I sat in the chair at the desk and spread the papers out on the table. It was an avalanche of information. Contracts, receipts, letters, notes. Some spoke of old debts, others of mysterious agreements, and all pointed to the ranch as the central point. It felt like I was facing a gigantic puzzle, but without the final figure to guide me. Jose had left me crumbs of a story that, now, I had to decipher on my own. And that hurt. It hurt more than any explicit betrayal. As I read, I noticed that some documents had dark stains, as if time had tried to erase them. I ran my fingers over them and felt the roughness of the paper. It was as if even the records wanted to resist being revealed. One detail, however, caught my attention: repeated names. People who appeared in different letters and contracts. Names that were somehow connected to Jose, but who had never been part of our lives.
Who were they?
Secret friends? Partners? Or something even darker? With each page turned, the room seemed to grow heavier. The air thinned, the smell stronger, the feeling that I wasn't alone. It was as if the ranch itself was breathing with me, bearing witness to my discovery. I held a shorter letter, almost a note. It will be okay if she never knows. The sentence pierced my chest like a knife. She was me. There was no doubt. Jose had written or received this with me in mind. My entire body trembled. I was the shadow in the midst of a story unfolding without me. I tried to calm myself, but my heart was racing. I rested my hands on the papers, breathing deeply, and felt tears fall, further staining the documents. I wept not only from the pain of discovery, but from the certainty that Jose had carried this secret out of love or fear.
But which?
This question burned in my mind. Had he wanted to protect me or exclude me? There was no way to know yet, and each page I read only deepened the confusion. I closed my eyes and imagined Jose sitting in that same chair, writing, signing, hiding. Did he tremble as I was now? Did he cry as I was crying? Or was he convinced he was doing the right thing? These images haunted me, and for a moment I felt anger. Anger at not having been part of this part of his life. Anger at having been left out of the truth. But along with the anger, there was longing. Longing for a man who perhaps had never been exactly who I thought. When I stood up, my hands full of papers, I realized this was just the beginning. Those yellow documents didn't reveal everything. They merely pointed to something bigger, as if they were clues to a puzzle that still needed to be solved. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I couldn't stop there. There was more, much more. The ranch still held answers, and I was ready to find them, even if it cost me every memory I had of my husband. Among the documents scattered on the table, something caught my eye: a small, yellowed envelope, almost hidden beneath the pile of papers. I picked it up carefully, feeling its light weight in my hands. I opened it slowly, and from inside slid several old photographs. My heart raced. Photos have always been my weakness, because they capture moments that words can't explain. But these weren't familiar memories. They were images of a life I never lived, and that Jose never shared with me. The first photo showed the ranch in better days. The house looked alive, the windows open, the garden well tended. There were people on the porch, laughing, talking, as if it were a family gathering. But I didn't recognize any of those faces. I looked at every detail, searching for Jose among them. And there he was, young, standing next to a woman I'd never seen before. His arm rested on her shoulder, and there was an intimacy in that gesture that cut me to the quick. Who was that woman? Another photograph showed children playing in the backyard. Two boys and a girl, running barefoot across the grass. The setting was unmistakable. The ranch. And in the background, once again, Jose was present, holding one of the boys in his arms. I put my hand to my mouth, feeling a chill run down my spine. Jose had never told me about these children. He had never even mentioned the possibility. Were they sons, nephews, or something even more disturbing? The questions multiplied like sharp knives inside me. I picked up another photo, and my eyes immediately welled up. It was Jose, sitting at the table, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Beside him, the same woman from before, holding his hand over the checkered tablecloth. The complicity in their gaze was impossible to ignore. The world spun for a moment and I felt my legs weaken. I sat in the chair, letting the photos slide across the table. The room seemed to spin, and a question hammered in my mind. With whom, after all, had I shared so many years of my life? I continued to look at the images one by one. There were parties, lunches, laughter. People gathered around a lavish table. Jose was in them all, always integrated, always close, like part of a family that wasn't mine. The ranch wasn't an abandoned place, as he said. It was the stage for a parallel life, carefully hidden. And I, on the outside, obeying the prohibition, never imagining what was happening within those walls. The feeling was of being betrayed again, even years after his death. One of the photos, however, froze me. It was blurry, but I could see Jose holding a small child in his arms, while the woman smiled at the camera. The baby was wearing an embroidered blanket with initials I didn't recognize. My eyes filled with tears. If that child was his, then my entire marriage had been built on a secret impossible to ignore. I clutched the photo to my chest, crying silently. It was as if each image ripped a piece of my soul. Tears fell onto the photos, further blurring some of the time-worn images. I wanted to scream, I wanted to tear up that evidence, but I couldn't. It was as if, even though it hurt, I needed to hold on to every detail. As if the photos were the only key to understanding what really happened. Jose's past was there, before me, printed on yellowed paper. And after so many years, I was finally seeing him without masks. It was incredibly painful, but also impossible to deny. As I watched, I noticed details hidden in the background of the images. Objects, symbols, even faces that recurred on different occasions. Everything pointed to a network of relationships I'd never known. People who seemed close to him, but strangers to me. It was as if I'd been a spectator to only half of the life of the man I married. And now, faced with the other half, I didn't know if I wanted to keep looking, but I couldn't stop. The photos held me captive, as if demanding I face the truth. The room seemed to shrink around me. The walls, covered in mold and cracks, silently observed my pain. The smell of the past mixed with the weight of the images suffocated me. I held a random photo and looked into Jose's eyes, trying to find the man I knew there. But his gaze in those images was different. It was light, free, happy. And this realization cut me even further. Could he never have been whole with me? Could part of his heart always have belonged elsewhere and to another family? I put the photos back in the envelope with trembling hands. I couldn't tear them, couldn't destroy them. They were cruel, but they were also answers. Answers I'd missed for 15 years of silence. I looked at the envelope and felt that it now held more than paper and ink. It held a burden, a piece of Jose's life he never wanted me to know. And yet, there I was alone, facing the truth the ranch had held. The truth hadn't asked permission to be revealed. It simply imposed itself. When I stood up, still holding the envelope, I realized that this discovery wasn't the end. On the contrary, it was only the beginning. The photos answered some questions, but raised others even more painful.
Who were those people?
Where were they now? And why had Jose chosen to hide everything from me? I knew that from that moment on, my life would never be the same again. The ranch had opened its doors, and with them, the wound of truth. I stood in the middle of the room, the envelope of photos still in my hands, feeling the weight of everything I had discovered. It was as if each image had ripped away a piece of my life, exposing a wound Jose had kept hidden. I looked around and realized that the entire ranch seemed to pulse, as if it were alive, breathing alongside me. That house held a truth I could no longer ignore. And for the first time, I understood why Jose had forbidden me from coming there, because the truth had teeth. I returned to my desk and examined the scattered papers, trying to piece them together. The contracts, the letters, the photos, everything pointed to the same conclusion. Jose had a parallel life. A life that included not only business, but also people, ties, perhaps even an entire family. My heart ached, but my mind searched for rationality. How had he managed to hide so much from me? How had he managed to divide his heart between two worlds without letting it show? This question burned within me more than all the others. The shock made me sit back down, my eyes welling up. Every memory of our marriage was now shadowed by this secret. The kisses, the smiles, the plans, how many of them were whole? How many were only half given to me, while the other half lived on the ranch? I felt deceived, betrayed, but also confused. Because, despite everything, I still remembered the man who held my hand in the hospital, asking me not to come here. What if, deep down, he just wanted to spare me this suffering? I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. The voices of memory came loudly. Jose saying certain topics weren't for me, Jose diverting the conversation, Jose repeating, "Don't go." Now it all made sense. He'd never trusted me to handle the truth. But was it really to protect me? Or was he actually afraid of my judgment? The line between love and cowardice blurred, and I found myself lost in the middle. The truth was there, but interpreting it was my greatest torment. I walked around the room, taking in every detail. The covered furniture, the heavy curtains, the still-closed trunk in the corner. It was as if each object silently bore witness to Jose's double life. I touched the desk, and a phrase escaped my lips. "Why did you do this to me?" My voice echoed through the empty space, and the walls returned the sound like a distant lament. The tears came again, hot, heavy, staining my face. It was impossible to hold them back. Because discovering the truth is far more painful than suspecting it. And yet there was a strange sense of relief. As cruel as it was, the truth was before me. The veil had been torn, and I no longer had to live in doubt. The ranch wasn't just a forgotten property, it was a vault of secrets. And now, that vault was open. I could see the life Jose never wanted me to see. The pain was deep, but there was also a spark of liberation. Because there is no greater prison than uncertainty, and I was, finally, free of it. But freedom comes at a price. Every document, every photograph, was a knife wound that rewrote my story. I could no longer look at my marriage the same way. The memories that once comforted me were now tarnished. Jose wasn't just the man who slept beside me, who held my hand. He was also the man with the hidden letters, the smiling photos with another woman, the children who might carry his blood. This duplicity tore me apart. It was like discovering that the love of my life had also been my greatest stranger. I clutched the envelope to my chest and closed my eyes again. In the silence of the ranch, I felt Jose's presence as never before. Not as the loving husband I knew, but as the complex, divided man, full of shadows. For the first time, I saw him whole, with his mistakes, his choices, and his secrets. And that hurt more than any outright lie. Because, deep down, I realized I had only loved part of him. The other part was there, before me, and I had never known it. The hidden truth didn't come in the form of a single revelation, but rather a painful mosaic. Fragments that, together, formed a double life. Jose was two men, one by my side, the other hidden away at the ranch. And I, unwittingly, was complicit in the silence, because, even without knowing it, I obeyed. I closed my eyes, accepted the apology, respected the promise. And this realization shattered me. Not just because he lied, but because I kind of let the lie grow. Standing slowly, I looked around the room once more. The papers, the photos, the trunk, they all screamed the same thing. The truth was there, waiting for me. I'd found it, even without meaning to. And now there was no turning back. The ranch had revealed its secret, and I had to decide what to do with it. When I finally realized the weight of everything before me, my legs gave out. I sat on the cold floor of my room, surrounded by papers and photos, as if I were in the wreckage of a silent explosion. The shock was so great that my body seemed to lose track of my mind. I stared at those documents and couldn't believe they were real. Jose, the man I swore I knew better than anyone, had hidden me my entire life. It was as if I had suddenly married a stranger. The tears came suddenly, thick, hot, relentless. I tried to hold them back, but it was impossible. The tears shook my chest, as if trying to purge all the pain accumulated over years of silence. Why, Jose? I repeated aloud, between sobs. The question echoed off the moldy walls, returning to me like an accusation. There was no answer, only emptiness. And that emptiness hurt more than any explanation could, because his silence had been his choice. And I, in the end, was merely a spectator in a play I never knew was happening. I ran my hands over my wet face and stared at the ceiling, trying to catch my breath. The shock made me alternate between anger and sadness. At times, I wanted to scream, break everything around me, burn down that ranch that had brought me so much pain. At others, I simply wanted to curl up, like a child seeking comfort in its mother's lap. It was a pain that had no escape, that found no place. Because it was a pain of loss, but also of discovery. I hadn't just lost a husband. I'd lost the image I had of him. The ranch seemed to mock me. Every creak of the floorboards, every breath of wind through the cracks, sounded like suppressed laughter. I felt surrounded, trapped by memories that weren't mine, but now belonged to me. It was an inescapable burden. The shock came not just from what I saw, but from what I imagined. Because for every photo, for every letter, there were 1,000 stories I'll never fully know. This uncertainty was torture. Jose took the answers with him and left me only the shards. I remembered his deathbed, his hand squeezing mine, his pleading gaze. Now everything made sense, and yet at the same time, it made no sense. Did he want to spare me? Or did he want to ensure I would never find out? This doubt gnawed at me, more than any proof. Because if it was to protect me, there was still love in the gesture. But if it was to hide his betrayal, then everything I experienced with him was built on sand. This duality was unbearable, and it tore me apart inside. I struggled to my feet, my legs shaking, my chest aching. I walked over to the dusty mirror in the corner of the room. I ran my hand over the glass, wiping away the layer of grime, and saw my own distorted reflection. The red eyes, the tear-streaked skin, the expression of a woman who no longer recognized herself. The shock was so great that even my face seemed to belong to someone else. The pain wasn't just from Jose's lie, but from the feeling of having lost myself in the midst of it. I rested both hands on the furniture and stared at myself. With each passing second, anger grew stronger within me. Why didn't he trust me? Why did he take away my right to choose whether to know or not? I would have borne the truth, no matter how painful. What I can't bear is the lie, the silence he imposed on me. I felt like screaming at the top of my lungs, but I held it back, because deep down I knew it was no use. Jose was no longer there to hear me, and that hurt even more. I returned to my desk and pressed my hands against the papers, as if trying to absorb strength from something that no longer exists. The shock continued to throb, transforming into a pain that seemed endless. I wanted to escape, but something held me captive. Maybe it was the need to understand every last detail. Maybe it was the inability to accept what I already knew. It was as if my heart was still searching for an excuse that would clear his image. But there was no excuse. The truth lay naked before me. I closed my eyes and felt a tightness in my chest so intense I thought I couldn't breathe. It was as if the entire weight of 15 years had fallen on my shoulders at once. The pain wasn't just that of a woman. It was that of a human being who discovers she's only lived half a life. The shock left me fragile, vulnerable, like never before. And in that state, I realized that the truth isn't a gift. It's a sentence. And I, without asking, had been condemned to carry it. I knelt before the still-closed trunk, tears streaming down my face, and pressed my forehead against the cold lid. The pain pierced me, but a part of me still wanted more answers. Because, cruel as it was, the shock wasn't enough. I needed to understand everything, every last bit. And I knew that trunk held what was missing. Fear and pain mingled, but there was no choice. I would open it, because when the truth calls, there's no way to cover your ears. As I walked from room to room, I realized that the ranch wasn't just the setting for Jose's secret. He was an accomplice. Every wall, every crevice, every covered piece of furniture seemed to hold silent memories, as if he'd witnessed it all in silence. It was strange to think that this house knew more about my husband than I did. The floorboards creaked beneath my feet as if protesting my presence, and for a moment I felt like an intruder on the stage of Jose's true life. I looked at the marks on the walls, scratches, stains, small cracks. To me, they were signs of abandonment. But to the ranch, they were records of stories. Stories I hadn't lived, but which were imprinted there. I touched the cold wood of the stairs and imagined how many times Jose had climbed and descended those steps, perhaps accompanied by the people I saw in the photographs. Pain shot through me again, because I, who had shared a lifetime with him, had never shared this space. It was as if the ranch had been his confidant, and I, merely a belated spectator. In the kitchen, I pulled back the sheet covering the wooden table. Dust spread, and the strong smell of the past filled the air. I ran my hand over the surface and closed my eyes. I imagined voices, laughter, dishes being served. I mentally pictured Jose sitting at the head of the table, but not with my family. I saw the faces that appeared in the photos, smiling, occupying the places that should have been ours. The ranch held that sound, that warmth, and now it showed me only the empty echo. It was cruel, and at the same time inevitable. The covered furniture was like ghosts. Each white sheet hid a story. I lifted one and found a chair. I lifted another and saw a sofa. Ordinary objects, but charged with a presence I couldn't grasp. The ranch didn't need to speak. It simply showed me. Its silence was more eloquent than any voice. And as I walked through each corner, I felt I was listening to a silent, heavy testimony, impossible to ignore. I climbed the stairs again, this time without fear. I touched the railing, which was rough, and felt as if Jose's hand were guiding me. But it was an illusion. The reality was that he had walked that space with secrets that would never be mine. The ranch held every step, every whispered conversation, every hidden encounter. It was as if the walls were telling me, "We saw. We know. You're too late." And this realization tore at my soul. I stopped before a broken window and looked outside. The overgrown yard seemed like another testament. The overgrown trees, the dry branches, everything spoke of a time that had passed without me. I felt the ranch surrounding me on all sides, not as an enemy, but as a judge. It didn't reject me, but it didn't welcome me either. It simply showed me, mercilessly, that I didn't belong in that story. It was like being in a silent courtroom, being judged by time and space. I sat in an old, dust-covered armchair and stared into the void. The ranch seemed to breathe with me, heavy, laden with memories. I thought of how many times Jose had walked through that door, perhaps with fear, perhaps with relief. I thought of how many promises he had made there, promises that never reached me. The ranch had witnessed it all, the love he shared, the secrets he had cultivated, the lies he had sustained. And now, mercilessly, it was handing over the inheritance to me. Not in words, but in sensations. I glanced once more at the locked room, the photos, the documents. I realized that the ranch wasn't just the keeper of his secret, but also his prison. Jose lived divided, and this place was the vault that sustained that division. Perhaps he hated this space as much as I did now. Perhaps, in his silence, the ranch was also his punishment. This reflection pierced me like a blade. The ranch didn't just guard, it also condemned. I stood up slowly and walked to the front door. The air outside seemed lighter, but the ranch lingered on my back like a shadow that wouldn't lift. I knew I could leave, but I also knew I would never completely free myself from that place. The ranch had witnessed everything, and somehow it had left the same mark on me. Because once I entered it, I too began to carry its history. I too became a witness. And in that instant, I realized the ranch wasn't just a hiding place for Jose's secret. It was living proof that the truth always finds a way to survive. Even locked away, even hidden, even buried under years of silence. The ranch guarded. The ranch waited. And at the right time, it opened its doors to me. I left the room with the documents and photos still in my mind, but something deep inside me already knew. Carrying that would be a burden for the rest of my life. The ranch had given me the truth, but not lightly. It had placed on my shoulders a burden that seemed greater than I could bear. Jose's silence was difficult enough, but the revelation was even crueler. Because an ignored lie can be forgotten, but a known truth never ceases to exist. I carried it now, like a stone in my heart. I sat on the porch, looking out at the tall grass that dominated the yard. The wind rustled the leaves, and every sound seemed to remind me of what I had discovered. I breathed deeply, trying to organize my thoughts, but I couldn't. It was as if there was a constant weight on my chest, a knot impossible to untie. The burden lay not only in the memories of what I had seen, but in the decision I would have to make from then on. To keep or to reveal. To remain silent or to share. There was no easy answer. I thought of my children. I looked at the photos and imagined the impact they would have on them. How could I say that the father they so revered had another life hidden? How could I destroy the image of a man who, for them, had always been a role model? My soul broke just imagining their faces upon hearing this truth. Part of me wanted to spare them, just as Jose had tried to spare me. But another part screamed that it was unfair to carry this burden alone. The weight was too much, and I no longer knew if I had the strength. I closed my eyes and felt the tears well up again. The burden of truth lay not only in what I had discovered, but in the dilemma it brought me. I could destroy Jose's memory, shatter everyone's image of him, reveal every cruel fragment I had found on that ranch. But in doing so, I would also destroy myself. Because it would be impossible to tell without reliving it, impossible to share without bleeding. The truth, I realized, was not liberation. It was condemnation, and I was trapped in it. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky red. Light filtered through the cracks in the porch, illuminating the documents I still had with me. The golden glow seemed to mock, as if to say, "Now it's your turn to decide." And I knew I couldn't escape this responsibility. The ranch had given me the secret, but not the solution. That was my burden. Carrying the truth wasn't just about knowing, it was about deciding what to do with it. And that was heavier than any silence. I remembered Jose's words in the hospital. His insistent plea, his anguished look. He knew this burden would be unbearable. That's why he tried to keep me away. But was that justified? Was hiding the truth truly love? Or was it just cowardice? These questions hammered inside me, crushing me. I wanted to believe that Jose loved me to the end. But what I discovered made that love seem tainted. And the stain, no matter how hard I tried, wouldn't come off. Night fell, and the ranch was plunged into shadows. I felt the chill of darkness envelop my body, and the burden of truth weighed even more heavily. Loneliness embraced me, reminding me that this decision was mine alone. I could leave and never tell anyone, or I could return home and reveal everything. But in either choice, pain would be inevitable. It was like facing two roads leading to the same destination: suffering. And this realization crushed me even more. I held the envelope of photos to my chest and closed my eyes. I felt as if Jose were beside me, not as comfort, but as a shadow. He had given me half of his life, and now I had to deal with the other half. It was unfair. I hadn't asked to carry this. But the truth doesn't ask permission. It simply arrives, invades, imposes itself. And once it enters, it never leaves. This is the burden of truth. It cannot be shared. It is always greater than the one who carries it. I took a deep breath and raised my eyes to the dark sky. I asked God what I should do. I asked for clarity. I asked for strength. But silence was the only answer. Perhaps because some decisions have no right answer. Perhaps because the truth is not to be resolved, but endured. This was the burden that now weighed on me, to endure. And to endure requires more courage than any secret, because living with doubt is pain, but living with the truth is an open wound. And so, on that cold night, I realized my life would never be the same. The ranch had served its purpose. It revealed what was hidden. But now, the weight was in my hands, and there was no one who could carry it for me. The next morning, I walked through the house in silence. The dim light filtered through the cracks in the windows, revealing dust particles dancing in the air, like silent goodbyes. I touched the covered furniture, ran my fingers along the cold walls, and felt the ranch breathe with me, as if it knew this would be the last time. There was a mixture of relief and pain within me. Relief at having finally discovered the truth, and pain at having lost, all at once, the man I loved and the image I held of him. I resealed the envelope containing the photographs and gathered the most important documents. I didn't want to take everything. I didn't need to. I just had to carry enough with me to never forget. I left the rest scattered on the desk, like silent witnesses to a past I hadn't lived. As I walked to the door, I heard the floorboards creak, and for a moment I thought Jose would appear, smiling, ready to stop me again. But the silence was absolute. Only I was left, staring into the shadows alone. Before crossing the threshold, I took one last look at the locked room. It no longer held mysteries for me, but it still weighed heavily, like an open tomb. I took a deep breath and whispered, "I found out, Jose. I found out everything." My voice broke in the air, and the tears came uncontrollably. I wept not only for the lie, but also for the love that lingered within me, even after everything. Because, deep down, part of me still wanted to believe he loved me, albeit imperfectly, divided and stained. I stepped out onto the porch and closed the door behind me. The creak echoed like a full stop. The morning wind brought the smell of damp earth, mingled with the scent of dry leaves. I walked through the overgrown yard, remembering how alive this space had once been. The ranch seemed to be saying goodbye to me too, letting out small creaks in the woodwork, as if saying goodbye. Each step I took was a weight being lifted, but it was also like leaving behind a part of my own life. When I reached the gate, I turned to look at the ranch one last time. The house stood still, silent, with its shuttered windows and worn roof. But I knew, behind that abandoned appearance, it still held echoes, laughter, secrets. The ranch had never truly belonged to me. It belonged to Jose, and to those who lived there with me gone. And now, after walking through its doors, it too is part of me, not as a home, but as a scar, a mark I would carry until the end. I leaned my hands against the gate and closed my eyes. I asked God for the strength to move forward, to not let the pain consume me. I also asked for the courage to decide what to do with what I had discovered. Whether I would reveal it to my children, whether I would keep it to myself until the end, I didn't know. But one thing was certain, that ranch would no longer be a prison. I had faced it, uncovered it, breathed it, and now I could leave it behind, even though the weight remained in my heart. Goodbye didn't erase it, but it allowed me to move on. I pushed open the gate and heard, for the last time, the sharp creak that had accompanied me since my first step. I crossed the dirt road without immediately looking back. Only after a few meters did I stop and take a deep breath. I turned around again, and for the first time, I didn't feel afraid. I only felt tired. The ranch stood there, motionless, as if watching me leave. But now, it no longer had power over me. I had faced what I had to, and that, painful as it was a victory. I continued walking, feeling the sun warm my face. Each step felt lighter, as if some of the burden were being lifted. But the truth, I knew, would follow me, because there's no way to completely abandon a revelation. The ranch would be empty, but inside me, it would always be full of secrets, of memories that weren't mine, of pains that became my inheritance. Saying goodbye to the ranch wasn't the end of the story. It was just the end of the search. The wound, that one, would remain open. And as the road stretched out before me, I understood that the goodbye wasn't just to the ranch, but also to the woman I'd been there. The obedient woman who'd blindly honor her promise, who lived without question. That woman was left behind, along with the rusty gate and the mold-covered walls. The one walking now was different. A woman marked by pain, but also strengthened by it. A woman who knew that the truth can destroy, but can also free. When I left the ranch behind, I understood that some truths aren't enough to heal, but to transform. What I found there shattered the image of the man I loved, but it also freed me from the prison of doubt. Jose left, taking his secrets with him, but the ranch, silently, chose to hand them over to me. And since then, I've learned that no promise can bury the truth forever. It always finds a way to resurface. What about you? Have you ever stopped to think about how many things your family keeps secret? How many secrets can change everything you believe in? Would you have the courage to face a revelation like the one I experienced? Or would you prefer to remain an illusion? Life has shown me that, however painful it may be, it's better to carry the wound of truth than the weight of lies. Because lies paralyze, but the truth, even if it hurts, keeps us moving forward. If this story resonated with you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. That way, you'll never miss any of the stories we tell here, stories that, like mine, show that no one emerges unscathed when the truth finally comes out.